Zhang Yi and his team had finally figured out a way to deal with the Corpse King and his army of undead, hoping to eliminate most of them at the very least in one fell swoop. At this moment, when Zhang Yi heard what Chunlei said, he unusually replied, "I, Zhang Yi, just want to leave you a surprise." Hearing this, Chunlei, Liang Yu and Uncle Yu were speechless. That statement coming from you doesn't sound convincing at all. However, they also knew Zhang Yi was not the type of person to act rashly without a considerable amount of thought about his safety. He was always willing to use any means to achieve his ends. Not rashly telling them about his spatial teleportation beforehand, he must have his reasons. So the group didn't dwell on further questions on that particular matter. But Zhang Yi continued anyway, explaining that at the beginning, he didn't think of the opportunity to really use this ability. This time, the zombie crisis which we encountered was completely different from what we'd faced since it broke out. It is more complicated than we all could have imagined. So far, I don't know how it will develop in the end. Hearing Zhang Yi's analysis made Uncle Yu ask what they should do next. Hearing Uncle Yu's question, Zhang Yi didn't answer immediately, but took out a lit cigarette from his alternate space, slowly took a drag while thinking. Then, as he let it out after a considerable thought, he said, "No matter what, we must solve this problem, and solve it as soon as possible. We cannot give these zombies any more room to grow. So what can we do?" Liang Yu asked in earnest. As Zhang Yi shook off the smoked part of his cigarette, he turned towards them and said, "Getting rid of these zombies could actually be not as difficult as we imagined. Even if the virus is very cold resistant, the zombies will not stay in such low temperatures outside." He then crouched down with a piece of white chalk in his hand, illustrating his plan in the snowy ground. The regional subway line where we are located is not complicated, and there is only one subcanal line passing through it. These zombies usually sleep in tunnels. And as Zhang Yi made an X, marking a spot in his diagram, he continued, "Right now, there is only one thing that can control all the zombies in the tunnel in the shortest possible time, and then seal it up." Curious and anxious, Liang Yu asked what the marked spot meant. "That's seawater." Hearing this sparked what Zhang Yi was getting at in Liang Yu's mind. It seems she was finally catching onto Zhang Yi's idea. Immediately, she loudly clasped her hands upon realization. "Wonderful, wonderful. This trick is really wonderful." Liang Yu also crouched down, joining Zhang Yi on the ground. Then, using her finger to illustrate in the snowy ground, Liang Yu continued that the secondary channel line is a one-way line. As long as your different space can accommodate enough seawater, the entire tunnel can be submerged. The underground tunnel is so deep, the rats and zombies inside would be submerged by the water by then. At least it can solve most of them. If the Corpse King was really alive, he would probably be drowned to death. Even in the worst-case scenario, they would have no way to survive in the tunnel. Hearing Liang Yu's explanation made Chunlei beam with realization. So as he clenched his fist in excitement, he added, "This is the reason why you are the boss. Your superpower is too buggy, and as of now, it just became the best weapon to deal with these zombies at this time." Uncle Yu was in all smiles as he joined in. "I think the most powerful thing is Zhang Yi's mind. Although each of us has superpowers, Zhang Yi is the one who uses his superpower to the fullest potential." Seeing everyone beaming with excitement made Flower meow in joy, although he didn't fully comprehend anything. Hearing this, Zhang Yi got up, and as he did, he added that this plan of his just came to mind. But the specifics in implementation still requires a lot of preparation. Also, there was a very critical issue, so he needs to hurry back and consult the professionals and technical personnel at home. Zhang Yi said this as he took out his vehicle from his alternate space, approached it and told everyone to get in. They needed to get to the shelter ASAP. The sooner this plan of his was implemented, the better. On the way, he expressed the urgency of the matter, adding that they needed to speed up and not give those zombies any chance to continue to grow. Like, at all. Meanwhile, at Radiant Prosperity Base, Xiao Honglian, together with her assistant, Zhuge Qingting, watch a recorded video sent by Dong Hu before his demise. The video had confirmed their suspicions all along. First, the number of undead creatures were simply unfathomable. Second, there was undoubtedly someone controlling the zombies from the shadows. Looking a bit uneasy, Zhuge Qingting said, "I didn't expect such a monster to exist underground. If they all rushed out, even if our current base is fully armed, there will be no way to stop them." He then turned his gaze towards Xiao Honglian and asked, "Should we consider moving underground?" Hearing the question, Xiao Honglian, although she knew that there was a high probability that they might lose the refinery and move underground, she was also resolved in her decision to defend the refinery to the bitter end. "This is absolutely impossible. If we lose the refinery, we will lose the foundation of our existence. No matter how high the price is, the refinery must be saved. This made Zhuge Qingting ask her another question. If the zombies really came to eliminate us all, how do we stop them? Xiao Honglian suggested they take the oil in storage and dump it around the refinery. As soon as those zombies come over, we will light the oil and burn them all. Zhuge Qingting pushed up his glasses and analyzed. If that's the case, then we might as well let the soldiers' families go underground first, so that even if something goes wrong with us, someone will be there. Xiao Honglian just laid back in her chair and told Zhuge Qingting to do just as he is told, and nothing more. Meanwhile, at this moment, Zhang Yi and his team arrived at the shelter. Seeing their safe arrival, Zhou Qi was the first to welcome them back. Then, she immediately went to prepare Zhang Yi a cup of hot coffee. In the lounging hall, Zhang Yi sat on the sofa to rest as Zhou Qi, holding a tray with a cup of coffee, asked what happened. Are you in trouble? I'm all right. It's true that we encountered a little trouble, but it won't be a big problem. Zhang Yi said this to ease Zhou Qi's worries as he took the cup of hot coffee. At that moment, Yang Xinxin and Lu Karen came in. Big brother, how did the operation go? Asked Yang Xinxin. Seeing them, Zhang Yi told them to come over. He had a very important question to ask the two of them. Hearing this, Yang Xinxin told Zhang Yi, Big brother, if you have any questions, just ask. I need a way to freeze seawater quickly, and a very large amount of seawater at that. Do you have any good ideas? Lu Karen was the first to speak up. Of course, there is a method. You just need to simply prepare some chemical materials. Curious about Zhang Yi's sudden question about seawater made Lu Karen ask, Big brother, why do you need to make a large amount of seawater freeze? Hearing this, Zhang Yi, expecting this question, replied with a knowing look. I need to freeze an entire subway line, more than 20 kilometers long. Zhang Yi continued, pondering. The kind and the degree of what I want will not be difficult, but it required time to prepare. Indeed, it would be easy to do and only requires some very simple chemical materials, Lu Karen said. Hearing this, Zhang Yi was delighted. That's great. In terms of time, we are actually not in that much of a hurry. Hearing this, Lu Karen gave a thumbs up, beaming with excitement. Great! I would prepare a lot of coagulant. The materials we found in the chemical factory at West Mountain Base just happened to come in handy this time. Well then, let's take action this afternoon and go get seawater together. Zhang Yi replied with a matching enthusiasm. The very next day, Zhang Yi and his group set out to drain a large amount of seawater. They quickly made their way to the edge of the East China Sea. And from the looks of it, the seashore had been frozen all the way up to a considerable amount of distance of what the eye could see. It was impossible to see the portion of the sea not frozen from the shore. So as they drove on the icy portion of the sea, Liang Yu was in awe seeing this. So beautiful. Is this the miraculous workmanship of nature? Witnessing the stunning scenery, Uncle Yu added that comparing Moh with a place like this, the ice surface in Moh in winter, absolutely pales in significance. Hearing everyone's praise, Zhang Yi told everyone that this was not the time to lament. There was no time to reminisce also. They had to drive over and see where they could get water. After 2 hours of driving on the icy portion of the sea, the group finally reached their destination where there was seawater. Excited, Chunlei pointed at the distance ahead. Boss, water. I see seawater. Zhang Yi cautioned everyone. We need to be careful and quick about this. We'll leave immediately after collecting the water. The vehicle was parked a few meters away from the portion of the sea unfrozen. And as they approached, Zhang Yi, without hesitation, opened the double door of his alternate space. And immediately upon doing so, the water suddenly started rushing in without an end. Rubbing his freezing hands together, Uncle Yu made mention that if he had known, he would have brought a fishing rod there. Fishing in a place like this would have been a wonderful thing. Hearing this gave Zhang Yi an idea. So as he turned to look at Uncle Yu, he said, When you put it that way, it's just gave me an idea. Let's build a fish pond at home, and then we can put some marine fish in it. What do you think? Zhang Yi asked this as he began to drain aquatic life into his alternate space as well. Chunlei walked up to Zhang Yi's side, nudged him a little and said with his usual playful demeanor, Boss, how about we consider building a seaview house here in the future? He then clasped his hands, hoping. Chunlei hoped that maybe, just maybe Morning Dew Base gets directly wiped out by the zombies. And when that time comes, they could occupy their base and their ships. And with their resources, they could still go out to sea for a long journey. Hearing this, Zhang Yi glanced at Chunlei with a faint smirk. Let's consider how to solve the current problem first. However, the ocean-going ships at Morning Dew Base are indeed something I am very coveted. Then, after collecting a sufficient amount of seawater, Zhang Yi turned around and gave the order to head back. The preliminary preparations were almost complete. Everyone complied as they head back to the car. Chunlei was a bit fired up about finally dealing with the zombies. Unbeknownst to everyone, a huge fish like the size of a submarine lurked just beneath the surface. Back at the shelter, Zhang Yi paid a visit at Lu Karen's workspace at the underground level. I have collected the seawater, and the next step is to let it settle. Are your materials ready? It's not a very special material as you might think. It's actually easy to prepare. These are precipitants. If you put them into seawater, they can quickly precipitate salt from the seawater. Lu Karen said this as she showed Zhang Yi 2 dozen blue plastic containers, give or take. And as Zhang Yi crouched down and opened one container to check its content, Lu Karen continued that only when the salt content is relatively low can seawater freeze relatively quickly at low temperatures. As for these being fully prepared, it will take at least 2 days. Hearing this, Zhang Yi responded, well, we can still afford to wait for only 2 days. At this moment, the AI system of the shelter issued an urgent warning to everyone in the shelter. Warning! Warning! The shelter is under attack. The current damage level of the shelter is 0.00001%. The attack is ongoing. Please solve the damage problem in time. Zhang Yi was awakened from his sleep at that moment. What? The shelter is under attack? Could it be that those zombies are here again? Thinking of these questions, Zhang Yi didn't deem it much of a threat immediately after a considerable thought. The reason being that the zombies, based on their means of attack, it was impossible to cause any real harm to the shelter in a short period of time. But upon witnessing what was happening outside that early morning, his expression immediately changed. At that moment, Zhang Yi, with a nervous look, saw a dense array of claws clinging continuously to the shelter's window. It was the mutated rats that they encountered from the depths of the underground Sitsu subway station. The window in front of him had been completely covered with a mischief of mutated rats. These giant rats had never appeared before. But from the scene outside, it seems like these rats had joined the fray due to a large number of their comrades killed by Zhang Yi and his team hours ago. Also, the investigation team of Radiant Prosperity Base were no different. As a result, these giant rats had simply joined forces with the zombies to attack. Outside the shelter's compound was the army of undead, excluding the sentinels, together with the mutated rats. Their vast numbers swamped the shelter's compound from all directions as they charged towards the outer walls of the shelter in full force. Their loud chirping from the window made Zhang Yi cover his hurting ears. He thought that the mutated rats were indeed a group of tough beasts. And from the looks of things, these giant rats had no special skills in other aspects. But their teeth were extremely sharp and could even bite through a military combat uniforms with ease. Therefore, with the shelter surrounded by these guys, they will certainly make an impact on the shelter's defenses. Zhang Yi's scalp was a little numb. According to the number of these giant rats, although their attacks would not allow the shelter to be breached in a short time, but water droplets dripping on the rocks of the shelter would wear away over the years, and they would definitely gnaw a big hole in the shelter. Even if they couldn't bite through it, they would make the outer wall full of holes. Through the cameras outside, Zhang Yi had also seen that these gnawing machines were busy doing the same thing at every part of the outer wall they've encountered. He knew that increasing the offensive was nothing more than the Corpse King's constant probing and need of collecting intelligence. If things continue, Zhang Yi and his family will only become more and more passive. And as for taking the initiative, they had to wait for 2 more days. Also, as long as the number of zombies were large enough, they couldn't be wiped out at once. There will always be zombies that could flee and convey all their enemies' fighting methods to the Corpse King. In the long run, the Corpse King will become smarter and smarter, and his army will also become stronger by extension. Although the addition of the mutated rats had made things troublesome, they were not unsolvable. Zhang Yi immediately called Chunlei, Uncle Yu and Liang Yu. They needed to go outside to deal with these unwanted intruders. Half an hour later, with a considerable amount of effort by the team, the rats were almost wiped out, and more than half of the zombies were killed also. The rest fled in the direction of Tsitsu subway station, staring at the pile of corpses of the mutated rats. Zhang Yi, still with an uneasy feeling, said, if these giant rats continue to be allowed to attack the shelter, it may take up to 2 years, give or take, for them to breach the outer wall of the shelter. He then turned around towards the shelter and gave the order for everyone to head back into the shelter. They needed to prepare. This should all come to an end possibly in 2 days' time. Meanwhile, at Morning Dew Base, they had abandoned their base at the port and taken refuge on their giant ship at sea. In order to avoid the relentless attacks of the zombies, the port had to be abandoned temporarily. In the past few days, everyone gradually discovered that the actions of the zombie wave had become more and more regular, and even had discipline like the army. Although abandoning the port meant they will lose a large number of materials in the containers ashore. But only by keeping the giant ship can they achieve long-term development. Seeing this, Wei Dinghai couldn't help but smile. He thought the other forces did not have such advantages as his base did. And on top of that, it seems that the casualties of the other forces would be quite heavy. The scene shifts to the Snow Worship Sect. And true to Wei Dinghai's analysis, the Snow Worship Sect seemed to have survived another wave of assault. And although their casualties were quite heavy only this time around, the invasion had also brought a huge benefit. The members of the Snow Worship Sect, who hadn't had meat in ages, were delighted. They began to drool upon seeing the sheer number and sizes of these mutated rats. These rats, as big as cats or puppies, could be enough for one person to eat for several days after being killed. At this time, they didn't care that these giant rats may carry viruses. Their fear of danger were completely masked by their eagerness to have a full meal with meat, a full juicy rat meat at that. Back at the shelter's compound, 2 days had passed by like a bullet, and Zhang Yi and his team were outside. So with a nervous anticipation, Zhang Yi took out his little experiment. And as he crouched down for inspection, the result was a success. The huge amount of seawater had already completed the basic precipitation. A large amount of white salt was precipitated. Zhang Yi extracted these salts full of impurities. At this time, the salt content in these seawaters was relatively low. Although there was still a certain gap from fresh water to seawater, it was easier to freeze. Now Zhang Yi could implement his plan. Lu Karen had also prepared dozens of barrels of coagulant for him. In addition to these, there were also a large number of explosives. Zhang Yi got up, and with a fierce determination in his eyes, he told everyone to hurry and get ready to set off. They had no time to waste and needed to implement their plan as soon as possible. The team didn't go directly to the subway station in Xitu Jiayuan City, but first went to the terminal station, Songzhuang, which was in the direction of the underground Xitu subway station. And in order to completely freeze these zombies and rats to death underground, they must first block all their retreat routes. Therefore, the first step in their plan was to completely blow up Songzhuang Station. At a safe distance, Chunlei told Zhang Yi that the explosives were all set. So when Zhang Yi received the go-ahead, he pressed the detonator without hesitation. Then, accompanied with a loud boom, the immediate vicinity was engulfed in a sea of flames. The ground collapsed quickly after. The ice, snow, and the underground mud buried the subway station deeply. Chunlei walked up to Zhang Yi with concern. "Boss, if you do this, what if the Corpse King discovers the danger in advance and runs away?" Hearing this, Zhang Yi just smiled, then made a gesture with his hand, not bothered at all if that happens. It would be best if it ran away. After all, his goal from the beginning was not to kill the Corpse King. He just want to make sure there is no one around the shelter that can threaten their safety. So as long as it is not near the shelter, it doesn't matter to him whether it is dead or alive. Hearing this, Liang Yu frowned and said with some concern, "But if all other human forces are wiped out, then the entire Tianhai city will be occupied by zombies and rats. Can we really stay out of it?" As a teacher, Liang Yu's thinking is always more detached and advanced. Her concern was typical of her. So when Zhang Yi heard this, he just smiled and explained that Liang Yu seemed to be thinking too much. If they were to go by her notion, then the deeper you think about it, the more serious your fear will be. And if what you say is true, perhaps one day the entire Blue Star will be destroyed by the virus. What can we do then? After all, our abilities were only enough to protect ourselves. It was definitely enough to think about your own living environment first. As for other things, we can only leave it to fate. We don't have such powerful abilities to think about everything at a higher level. If you are successful, you can help the world. If you are poor, you can only take care of yourself. However, what I care about most now was the latter. Then Zhang Yi walked up to the entrance of the underground Xitu subway station. He opened his dimensional door and poured out a huge amount of seawater along the subway entrance. The huge amount of seawater rushed forward madly along the narrow tunnel. At this speed, it only took a couple of minutes to completely release the seawater and flood the entire tunnel. The rats in the subway may be able to sense the crisis and flee in advance, but most of them will be drowned by the water or even frozen to death in it. As for the dormant zombies, when they don't encounter living people or receive commands from the Corpse King, they will not wake up no matter what happens. All Zhang Yi has to do is to get rid of most of the zombies and rats. Even if there are a couple that slip through the net, as long as the number is small enough, they will not pose any threat to Zhang Yi and his team. In the subway tunnel, the surging flood kept washing everything in its path, and the water was getting bigger and bigger, like a rushing river during a flood season. The flood gradually submerged the rats hiding in the cracks of the tunnel. The giant rats screamed in fear, and then hurried to the place where the flood did not cover. But how could they run faster than a flood? Soon a large number of rats were submerged. It also submerged the zombies dormant deep in the wet and muddy tunnel. Deep in the subway, the zombies seemed to have received some kind of guidance and began to wake up. However, even if the zombies have stronger physical strength than humans, they cannot maintain the stability of their bodies in the tide. They were soon washed away and toppled like broken wood. The flood was getting bigger and bigger, and the entire tunnel was slowly submerged. Then Zhang Yi began to open the coagulant that Lu Karen made for him. Many large blue barrels. After opening them, a transparent liquid was poured out from them. After the coagulant was poured into the water, the purified seawater began to condense into ice at a speed visible to the naked eye. The ice layer spread rapidly toward the depths of the water. Those zombies and giant rats that were still struggling in the water were soon frozen solid. Hours passed in a flash. The entire secondary canal line was now completely frozen. Zhang Yi clapped his hands. Now our problem has been solved. It doesn't matter if some zombies and giant rats escape. It doesn't matter if the Corpse King and his bronze-armored sentinels survived. They pose no threat to Zhang Yi and his team with their current number and power, even if they may all be elites. Zhang Yi and his team can easily kill them. We should be at ease for a while. As for the troubles of the remaining zombies and rats, let other forces worry about it. Let them deal with the headache. Zhang Yi said this to everyone with a smile. Uncle Yu, Liang Yu and Chunlei looked at each other and smiled with ease. Unexpectedly, Zhang Yi had solved this huge problem with such a simple method. Uncle Yu couldn't help but sigh. Your dimensional space ability is really abnormal. At this moment, Liang Yu asked, what should we do next? What should we do? Zhang Yi repeats with a smile. His entire demeanor speaks like the answer should be pretty obvious. What else can we do? Of course, we have to beat up the fallen dogs. Zhang Yi has always been cautious in doing things, and he will not leave any chance for the other party to counter. Although the entire subway tunnel has been frozen, there must be some remnants of the defeated army who have escaped from their demise. And those who can escape, except for some who are lucky, the rest are definitely those with strong vitality. Whether it's zombies or rats, anyway, these things are very threatening to us. Since we are here, we can't leave empty-handed. It's always good to kill more. Zhang Yi took out a spray gun and loaded the bullet with a click. He then raised the gun, turned to his team and said, let's go. We'll kill as many as we can, and then do one last cleanup. After that, we'll call it a day. No one had any objections. And after watching Zhang Yi almost single-handedly wiped out the zombies and mutated rats from the sidelines, the three were restless, itching to join in, even if it was just to clean the lucky survivors up. So the team quickly made a mad dash for the giant pit that led to the subway entrance. Around the giant hole, the group were not surprised to find a couple of zombies and mutated rats fleeing from the scene. Although their number wasn't exactly expected, they didn't pose any threat to the group. So, in less than an hour, the team eliminated any survivor they could find without breaking a sweat. Meanwhile, at an undisclosed location in the suburban snowy field, 7 or 8 huge copper-armored sentinels of the Corpse King crawled out of the subway pit. Then, soon after, a short humanoid creature covered with white fur did the same. Gritting its teeth in anger, the creature was pissed that the tunnel was completely destroyed. No one could imagine that this thing that looked plain and had no fighting power would actually be the Corpse King who commanded the entire subway tunnel full of undead. At this time, the White Corpse King looked at the subway tunnel that was completely submerged in ice water. There was a trace of confusion in its eyes, because the information it gathered was to continuously cultivate the zombie group in this place, then expand the scale and finally kill all the humans in the shelter in the southwest. But now, the entire subway tunnel has been completely destroyed. The army of undead it cultivated with great effort has also been almost wiped out. And the remaining part of the zombies cannot form a large-scale zombie army at all, let alone attack the human shelters. At this time, it doesn't know what to do next. 4 huge copper-armored corpses, his sentinels, surrounded the Corpse King in the middle. They lowered their heads and waited for the order of the Corpse King. Without the order of the Corpse King, they will not act most of the time unless they encounter a living person and have a stress reaction. After a long while, the Corpse King's brain seemed to be restarted suddenly. It made a decision, that is, to turn around and walk step by step towards the distant north. The remaining bronze-armored sentinels followed closely behind, step by step towards the north, walking slowly against the ice and snow. Meanwhile, at Radiant Prosperity Base, Xiao Honglian was ruthless. She ordered her soldiers to dig deep trenches around the base and then dump a large amount of crude oil into them. Whenever the zombies and rats attack, they directly ignite the crude oil in the trenches. Immediately, a 5-meter-high wall of fire appears that covers the entire refinery. The blazing fire burned many zombies and rats to death. After all, flames was the most effective means of eliminating the zombies and rats. With fuel being extremely scarce nowadays, it was considered as one of the 4 best resources to have and manage. However, in the case of Radiant Prosperity Base, it was very luxurious for Xiao Honglian to do this. After all, with no working government, who can stop her from using more oil resources however she wishes? Also, they can fully afford this consumption. The scene then shifts to Emerald Waterside Base, and it seems that the current situation was not ideal for Xing Tian and his men. They were able to withstand 4 or 5 battles at most. However, the relentless and countless zombies appearing every day was impossible to keep up, and soon, their strength was severely depleted. So much so that later, Xing Tian had to lead his remaining men to hide in the depths of the base. Xing Tian's last resort was to hide first, and then come out from underground after these zombies disappeared. It didn't matter if they left the steel mill equipment to the zombies for the time being. After all, the zombies didn't know how to use equipment, nor destroy them. These living dead were only interested in human flesh. Back at Luck Manor, specifically in the shelter's lounging hall, Yang Xinxin, with a laptop on her lap, called out to Zhang Yi. "Big brother, there is a very important email that you need to read." She then handed over the laptop to Zhang Yi to take a look, who did so with evident curiosity. At this moment, Zhang Yi, upon seeing the content of the email on the computer, his entire demeanor immediately shifted as his eyes widened with an evident shock etched on his face. The content of the email was about the arrival of a special dispatch personnel from Jiangnan District to Tianhai City, and the following invited guests should please be sure to arrive at the Tianhai City Central Building on time at 2:30 that very afternoon. The list of the invited guests were Xing Weinan from Emerald Waterside Base, Xiao Honglian from Radiant Prosperity Base, Wei Dinghai from Morning Dew Base, Yuan Kongye, the leader of Snow Worship Sect, and Zhang Yi, who had no title. The email had a signature below which belonged to Jiangnan Military Region. A visible sweat dripped down Zhang Yi's face when he finished reading the email. Jiangnan Military Region. Isn't it one of the 5 major military regions in the country with its headquarters in Jinling? Zhang Yi questioned. For all citizens, this was basic common sense. The 5 major military regions in the country represented the top military forces in China. Before the apocalypse, they were the foundations of the country. And after the end of the world, they had become the cornerstones of the stability of the country. As for how strong the Jiangnan region was, there is no need to question it. The reason why Zhang Yi was able to defeat West Mountain Base, who were arguably the strongest force in Tianhai City, was largely due to Jiangnan region launching a missile, which Zhang Yi took advantage of. Basically, if the Jiangnan region wanted to, they could make the entire Tianhai City disappear from the map in a blink of an eye. At this time, Yang Xinxin suddenly drove her wheelchair forward with a nod. "Yes, big brother. I think it must be them." Hearing this, Zhang Yi frowned slightly. How can we be sure that this email is real, and not a conspiracy or a prank by someone? Yang Xinxin shook her head when she heard the question. "Brother Zhang Yi, I can tell you for sure that this must be a message from someone in Jiangnan District, because our network system is equipped with a very strong firewall. If I don't allow it, the message can't be delivered. But this email went straight over my superficial firewall and was sent directly to our mailbox. And there are only 2 types of people who could do this. The first was a hacker who was above me, and the second was an official agency with higher authority at the internet level. Of course, it's impossible for anyone in the country to break into our network in such a short time without me noticing. So I can conclude that the other party must be from Jiangnan District. What I failed to find out was their purpose for coming to Tianhai City suddenly this time. However, I believe it could be related to the problem of zombies," Yang Xinxin said with a guess. Hearing this, Zhang Yi asked her after a brief moment. "They could actually do this? Doesn't that mean our network is no longer safe?" Yang Xinxin smiled disapprovingly. The real core of the shelter is the internal network, which uses an independent server and has no connection with the outside world. They're welcome to give it a try, but I can guarantee that they can't break it no matter how many times they're given. Hearing this, Zhang Yi breathed a sigh of relief. However, he still felt that this problem had become a little tricky now. With the addition of external forces, and the behemoth whose strength is completely overwhelming than that of the 5 major forces in Tianhai City, the situation was heading to an uncharted territory. Out of control. But I do agree with your reasoning earlier. I also think their visit here is likely related to the current zombie tide. After all, the scale of the zombie tide is too large, and its origin is too mysterious. If it is left unchecked, perhaps all corpses in the entire Tianhai City will become a huge zombie tide. Not to mention that there are also terrifying giant rats mixed in. Once the zombie tide and the mutated rat swarms spread to other cities, it will turn into an uncontrollable disaster. Yang Xinxin nodded in agreement. From this email, it's evident that they are fully aware of all the conditions in the entire Tianhai City. and their accurate singling out the leaders of the various forces was an undeniable proof of their reach. I think I should go there. There is no need to offend a higher-level district at this time. Zhang Yi leaned back on the sofa with his head in his hands and thought for a while. He then continued. Judging from the computer capabilities of several other companies in Tianhai City, it is unlikely that this is a trap set by them. However, for safety reasons, I'd better go with our strong armed forces we possibly have with me. This is the safest way. With the power of other forces in the entire Tianhai City greatly weakened, Zhang Yi wasn't particularly worried when it came to safety. Also, as long as he goes with his elite team, even if they encounter any force, there wouldn't be too much danger. And even if they couldn't beat an opponent that was too strong, they could still escape easily. So, Zhang Yi called everyone to the lounging hall and told them about the situation at hand. After hearing that people from Jangan district were coming to Tianhai City, everyone had different expressions on their faces. A worried Chunlei said with a bitter face, "Our current life is relatively stable. If other forces enter Tianhai City, I'm afraid it will change everyone's current living environment." Zhang Yi shook his head disapprovingly when he heard what Chunlei said. Although Tianhai City is a port city with relatively abundant supplies, but compared to the Jangan district, it's simply not worth mentioning, including the things Zhang Yi had in his hands. After all, Jangan has been the most prosperous commercial region since ancient times. After Zhang Yi's explanation, Chunlei was a bit relieved. That would naturally be the best. I just think everyone is living a pretty good life now, and I am afraid of changes. Hearing this, his reaction was understandable. You see, people who live a comfortable life always don't want anything to change the status quo. Considering the problem from an optimistic perspective, Zhang Yi had a good feeling about the arrival of the people from the district. And except for Chunlei, a pessimist, the others seemed to think the same. Uncle Yu, who was born in the military, had his arms crossed when he added in a confident manner, "I think we should trust them." As the leader of the region, Jangan region must not want to see a large-scale zombie riot in a city with a large population like Tianhai City. Liang Yu nodded in agreement. "I think so too." Hearing this, Zhang Yi also nodded and said after a considerable thought, "Well, since the news has been sent to us, we have to go and take a look anyway." He then looked at Yang Xinshin. "Yang Xinshin, you are responsible for monitoring the network." Hearing the task assigned to her, Yang Xinshin replied with a slight nod. So, with a fierce determination, Zhang Yi cautioned everyone. "Although we can basically determine the identity of the other party, we still have to be on the safe side to avoid traps set by other people using some unknown means." The scene shifts to Tianfeng district in Tianhai City, where several buildings were now completely covered by the snowstorm, leaving only a few floors of a couple buildings which once used to be considered giants. Amidst these frozen buildings was the vehicle of the Jiangnan District Investigation Team. Their vehicle, which was specially made for their mission, sped at top speed on the snowy field with ease. They soon reached their destination several seconds later. Parking near a building which was now mostly buried by ice and snow was once the magnificent central building. The exposed half was also piled with thick snow. If the positioning was not accurate enough, it would be difficult to find this location. Seeing the current state of the central building, the deputy captain, Bailey Changqing, commented, "Oops, I didn't expect this place to be like this." Folding his arms, he approached the building and continued, "This place is terrible. There should be many people coming by. So this mess was not good." At this time, the only blonde in the team, Wu Di, was next to him. And with a relaxed smile on his face, he declared, "It doesn't matter. I'll clean it up." Then, he opened his right hand and pointed at the central building in the distance. Soon after, accompanied with a loud boom, a massive ray of golden light quickly shot from his palm, and the thick ice and snow piled in front of the building shook violently. A moment after, a giant hole was created in a large pile of the ice and snow, creating a passageway into the building. After doing all this, Wu Di stepped aside with a smile on his face, then made a pleased gesture. "Captain, please do us the honor." The team captain, Bian Junwu, said nothing with an expressionless face as he walked past Wu Di. The team captain was wearing a pair of black winter gloves and had a dark glasses on with a gray trench coat. Bailey Changqing followed closely behind, and the others did the same in turn. From the order of their footsteps, their status in the team can be seen. The first and obvious was the team captain, Bian Junwu, followed by the deputy captain, Bailey Changqing. The third was Wu Di, and then their virus experts Meng Xiu and Qi Guangming, who were parallel and had the same status. In the investigation team, each member's combat power level was higher than an elite soldier of the major forces. Especially the two captains and Wu Di, their abilities are at least at the level of a base leader or even higher. A while later, Radiant Prosperity Base, with their usual red heavy armor truck, was the first to arrive at the scene. Xiao Honglian came with 4 mutant captains and 10 elite warriors, while Zhuge Qingting and the rest stayed behind to protect the base. Upon arrival, Xiao Honglian saw the uniquely modified vehicle and commented, Only one car? It seems that there are not many people sent by the district." Xiao Honglian felt a little heavy. She knew very well how serious the threat of the zombie tide was. If a large army was not sent over, then it would be difficult to deal with the army of undead completely. Xiao Honglian led her soldiers to the central building. But when they got closer to the building, she clearly saw the ice and snow passageway that was possibly more than 10 meters deep. "Well, this is it." Xiao Honglian stretched out her hand to feel the shape of the ice and snow passageway. The regular curved surface showed that it was not made by a machine, but it looked like a passage that was punched out by a person, and it was very smooth and flat. "This is the method of a mutant. There are masters among those who came," she whispered. Then she led her soldiers through the giant hole. And just as they were approaching the end, a blonde-haired man in a uniform suddenly came out, looking at them with a smile. "Which base are you from?" Hearing this, Xiao Honglian frowned but answered anyway. "We are from Radiant Prosperity Base, and I am the leader, Xiao Honglian." Wu Di's feminine face had a condescending look. "Xiao Honglian, the former captain of the Tianhai City Criminal Police Brigade. Welcome." Wu Di said this to show that the investigation team knew all there is to know about her. Wu Di continued that Xiao Honglian can proceed to enter the building, but only she could enter. Her men, on the other hand, must stay outside for the time being. Hearing this, Xiao Honglian did not refuse. She turned her head towards her men and told them to wait for her outside. But a captain-level mutant whispered to her with evident worry, "Leader, what if it is a trick?" Xiao Honglian raised a sneer at the corner of her mouth. "Even if it's a scam, if I want to leave, no one can stop me." Hearing this, her soldiers watched silently as she made her way into the central building step by step. Not long after, the second base to arrive was Morning Dew Base. Wei Dinghai was more cautious and even brought his strongest deputy Chun Jingguan with him. After all, during this period, Wei Dinghai was a little nervous because of the successive defeats and corpse tide attacks. So as they entered the giant passageway in the heavy pile of ice and snow, Wu Di blocked their path and was only allowing Wei Dinghai to proceed. Chun Jingguan was not happy hearing this. "What are you guys afraid of? Are you afraid that we will eat you up if we have more people?" Seeing Wu Di's condescending smile made Chun Jingguan furious. At this point, he cared even less about losing face. And although the other party was in the name of Jiangnan District, this was Tianhai City and not their territory. After hearing Chun Jingguan's words, Wu Di's mockery became even stronger. "We only talk to the leaders of each major force. Or, could it be that you are the boss of Morning Dew Base?" Chun Jingguan was boiling with rage upon hearing this. However, his boss, Wei Dinghai, who was right in front of him, signaled him to stop and said, "We came here with sincerity. Since you guys just want to talk to me, it's understandable to let me go alone." Wei Dinghai then turned to face Chun Jingguan and patted him on the shoulder. "Just wait for me outside." He then gave Chun Jingguan a warning look, conveying that the guy in front of them was a mutant and a master at that, so he shouldn't conflict with him over such a trivial matter. Chun Jingguan's body stiffened almost immediately, so with a simple nod, he replied that he understands. Hearing this, Wei Dinghai walked into the central building with a calm expression. Chun Jingguan's face, however, looked a little ugly, but thinking of Wei Dinghai's instructions, he didn't dare to make a move, so he could only pretend not to hear and stand aside. This action attracted a burst of laughter from the soldiers of Radiant Prosperity Base who were nearby. Not long after the people from the two forces arrived, Zhang Yi and his team arrived next. Looking at the vehicles and soldiers from a distance, Zhang Yi knew that the people from Radiant Prosperity Base and Morning Dew Base had arrived first, and their leaders were probably inside already. Zhang Yi took out his handgun and said, "It's not like enemies can't get together, but I hope these guys can be more peaceful and not cause trouble." Zhang Yi didn't want to be entangled in any needless fights, but was prepared to fight if it came down to it. Sure enough, when Zhang Yi and his team got off his car, the atmosphere on the scene suddenly became tense. The soldiers from Radiant Prosperity Base looked at them with disdain and anger, their eyes almost blazing with fire, but at the same time they were also deeply afraid. Because after the battle of the 5 major forces, everyone reached a consensus that the combat effectiveness of Zhang Yi's team was very strong, and they should not be provoked easily. Zhang Yi, remaining vigilant at all times, walked past them without uttering a word. Zhang Yi and his companions reached the front of the central building, and also saw the passageway cleared by Wu Di. He immediately realized that this method was just an indirect warning to let everyone who came there understand how powerful the special envoys of the Jangan region were. At that moment, Wu Di's voice sounded from the giant hole. "You are Zhang Yi, right? Come in by yourself and the others must stay outside." When Zhang Yi heard Wu Di's voice, he showed a harmless smile on his face, spread his hands and said humorously, "Okay, as you wish." He then asked Uncle Yu and the others to stay outside for a while or go back in the car if they chooses. Zhang Yi walked into the central building slowly as Wu Di's eyes were on him, almost never leaving. Approaching Wu Di, Zhang Yi asked with a smile, "By the way, which room is it in?" Hearing the question, Wu Di looked at Zhang Yi with his arms crossed. A smile involuntarily crept on his lips. Based on their intel, Wu Di heard that Zhang Yi was a strong mutant. So, upon seeing him, his little fiery eyes showed an undeniable sense of competitiveness. Wu Di wanted to have a little spar with Zhang Yi if possible. On the left-hand side of the 5th floor, there is the 3rd conference room. "Oh, thank you." Zhang Yi just smiled and left. His demeanor didn't look imposing at all, like a harmless young man next door. Zhang Yi walked according to the path Wu Di pointed out, and on the way, he met several other people in the investigation team. Soon, he reached the meeting room that Wu Di had directed. The door was slightly opened, and he walked in with a slight push. The meeting room was spacious, with a huge red table in the middle. When Zhang Yi walked in, no one bothered to look over. 2 old acquaintances, Xiao Honglian and Wei Dinghai, were also there. However, what Zhang Yi cared about most was the middle-aged man sitting in the first seat, wrapped in a gray coat and wearing large sunglasses indoors. Could it be that he is blind? Zhang Yi thought with a smile and introduced himself as he took a seat. "I am Zhang Yi. May I ask who you are?" Hearing the question, Bian Junwu put down his arms and said in a cold tone, "My name is Bian Junwu, and I am the person in charge of the investigation of the zombie situation sent by the Jiangnan district this time." Zhang Yi gave a delightful smile and replied, "Oh, it turns out to be Mr. Bian, whom I have admired for a long time." After an undisclosed time, Xing Tian from the Emerald Waterside base also arrived at the conference room. "It took me a while to travel. Please forgive me." Bian Junwu replied that it was fine, and then gestured with his hand for Xing Tian to take a seat. Xing Tian smiled and greeted Bian Junwu first, then sat down next to Zhang Yi. Xiao Honglian and Wei Dinghai hated Xing Tian for his betrayal and robbery. However, Xing Tian didn't care about their looks at all, and chatted with Zhang Yi right away. "Old classmate, it seems you've managed to stay safe." Zhang Yi frowned and his voice became low. "Don't mention it. I have to clean up those things every day, and they now seems to be annoying me to death. If this continues, I'm afraid my shelter won't last long." Zhang Yi said this with a heavy sigh as he slumps in his chair. Upon hearing that Zhang Yi was also having a miserable life, a hint of joy flashed in the eyes of the leaders of the 3 major bases. Although they were also miserable, as long as everyone was the same, they would be balanced. After all, as the saying goes, misery loves company. Zhang Yi was unsure if it was an illusion, but he felt a pair of eyes immediately glanced over his direction when he said this. However, Bian Junwu was wearing sunglasses, so his eyes could not be seen. Thus, he concluded that it might just be an illusion. Among the 5 major forces, the representative of the Snow Worship sect was the last to arrive. However, the person who came was not the leader Yuan Kongya, but the high priest Zhang Yixin. No one felt anything strange about this. It was obvious that Yuan Kongya usually did not manage any affairs in the Snow Worship sect. After all, she was a young girl who had barely passed the age of 20, give or take. Yuan Kongya wasn't as good at management as the experienced Zhang Yixin, so it was natural that Zhang Yixin was the one who came to the meeting on behalf of the Snow Worship sect this time. Zhang Yixin greeted Bian Junwu politely, and then found a seat to sit down. Seeing that all the invited guests had arrived, Bian Junwu silently rolled up his sleeves and looked at his watch. "Very good, no one is late," he said. His voice was very cold, devoid of any emotion, as if it came from an ice cave, which made everyone uneasy. He then put his arms heavily on the table. His gaze swept over everyone present, and with just one sentence, the expressions on everyone's faces became serious. The zombie crisis in Tianhai City has broken out. As the largest forces in Tianhai City, you guys have an unshakable responsibility. But upon seeing the look on your faces, it was obvious that you guys expected the envoy of Jiangnan district to come here to settle this crisis. You guys are thinking of pushing the responsibility on us right away. Do you know what the significance of establishing a shelter is? I will exempt the Snow Worship sect for the time being. They belong to a non-governmental organization after all. But the four of you have either directly occupied an official shelter or inherited most of the resources of that shelter. And the significance of the existence of the shelter in each city is to maintain local stability when the city is in crisis. Bien Junwoo roared, slamming his fist directly on the table without any reservation. The sneer at the corners of his mouth became stronger. You guys occupy the most advantageous resources, but are unwilling to bear the responsibilities of protecting the city's stability. What else can this be but incompetence? Xiao Honglian remained silent, her arms crossed. She was unable to refute Bien Junwoo's words, because she naturally understood the significance of the existence of a shelter, which was to allow more people to survive. But Wei Dinghai, on the other hand, didn't. So with a look of concern, he said, Mr. Bien, these words are light, easy to say. Why wouldn't we want to maintain the stability of Tianhai City? But the scale of this zombie tide is too large. It appeared suddenly, and there are already countless zombies everywhere, causing chaos. Relying solely on the power in our hands, there was no way to solve this crisis. After all, we are not like the Jiangnan district, which has a large number of powerful weapons, and the most elite legions in the country. Who knew that after Wei Dinghai finished speaking, a smile which had involuntarily crept on Bien Junwoo's lips would become obvious and blatant. Then, he crossed his arms and lay back in his chair, laughing unscrupulously like a madman. Then, he restrained his smile. His tone, again, became colder. Since you don't have the ability to deal with this crisis, from now on, just obey my orders. I will take on the commanding task of this zombie crisis. And all your forces must obey my orders unconditionally. The faces of everyone present suddenly changed, but it was mostly a look of shock. However, Zhang Yi's face sharpens with a look of defiance. Asking me to obey other people's orders unconditionally? Impossible. Even if the other party was the Jiangnan district, Zhang Yi couldn't accept it. Because being mobilized by others, there was a possibility of being sacrificed. Zhang Yixin was the first to speak up. We may not be able to accept this, Xing Tian also added. Even if the Jiangnan region is at the top, a few of you want to command all of us, you are underestimating us. Then Xiao Honglian finally cut in. It's only possible unless you send a large force. Everyone spoke one after another, and it was the same issue. They could not accept their power being taken away from them by others. What's more, it was just a small team that didn't know the depth. If a large force came, they would have endured it. Bien Junwoo sneered and said, "Oh? You mean you think I don't have the qualifications, right?" Xiao Honglian snorted coldly. Although the others didn't say anything, the meaning in their eyes was very clear. And even though your team might be strong, you are not qualified to be the commander-in-chief of us. So, after a brief moment, Bien Junwoo said, "Then, can you guys solve this crisis with your own strength?" Hearing the question, everyone was silent for a while. After all, no one really knew how large the zombie tide and rat swarm were. Bien Junwoo sneered. You guys don't have the ability to protect Tianhai City, and had also caused the zombies to spread to the surrounding cities, affecting the residents of other cities. You've become greedy for the insignificant power in your hands and are reluctant to let go. But don't forget, Bien Junwoo slammed the table heavily, alerting everyone. Tianhai City is not your property. Huagua is still there, and so is Jiangnan, the region with the highest power command center in the Jiangnan area, Bien Junwoo said as he stood up from his chair. And although he was thin, he was unusually tall and had a mighty presence. There was also a fierce military aura on him, a feeling that Zhang Yi and the others only felt on a military commander in the past. You know, the world before all the ice and snow. Bien Junwoo folded his arms and looked down at everyone and said, "I come here on behalf of the Jiangnan region, and what I say is the will of the Jiangnan region. If you are unwilling to obey my orders, then the consequences are not something you can bear." Zhang Yi frowned and said nothing. His forces only had a few people, so even if he handed over the so-called command, the loss would be minimal. Unlike the other major forces which had a large population and resources. But even so, Zhang Yi was unwilling to lose all initiative, because it would obviously put him and the people around him in danger. Xiao Honglian sneered. "If we don't obey, are you going to send troops to destroy us?" She questioned. Xiao Honglian knew all too well of the military might of Jiangnan region, so she was naturally afraid. But the reason for their current meeting was for negotiation. And she had to be brave enough to fight for her own interests. After all, power is something that, once given away, it would be difficult to take it back. Xiao Honglian and a few others were worried that if they gave up their power, they would become vassals of the Jiangnan region in the future and lose their autonomy. Bien Junwoo pointed his sunglasses in the direction of Xiao Honglian and stared at her quietly for a few seconds, before she continued in a cold tone. Are you trying to scare me? To scare us? Bien Junwoo opened his lips and said slowly, do you think the current situation is not serious enough? Do you think this incident only concerns your Tianhai city? To tell you the truth, when we came to investigate this time, we were given 2 orders. The first was to try to solve the zombie crisis with local forces as much as possible, and not allow the situation to worsen and spread to other cities. The second was once it was found that things are out of control and there is no way to solve the zombie problem through manpower, then Bien Junwoo stopped talking and then slowly sat back in his chair. The entire Tianhai city must be abandoned. His last statement was cold, but also carried a huge sense of responsibility. Also, it was not as cold-hearted as that of the leaders of the 5 forces present. Is that really the case? Zhang Yi couldn't help swallowing his saliva. His eyes were extremely serious. He had considered such a situation. Once the situation in Tianhai city gets out of control, and the threat starts to spread to all the surrounding cities, then Tianhai city will undoubtedly outweigh its value. Therefore, abandoning it, which in turn would stop the losses in time in Jiangnan region's eyes, was an expected choice. Just like when abscesses appeared in the human body, if there was no way to cure them with medicine, they could only be removed by surgery. In this case, Bien Junwoo and his investigation team was actually equivalent to medicine. But once the medicine fails, the next surgery would be. Zhang Yi took a moment to finish his thoughts. He knew well what the implication meant. If it comes down to it, the entire Tianhai city would cease to exist. Zhang Yi absolutely did not want to face such consequences. The others also understood what Bien Junwoo meant. For a time, everyone fell silent. Even Xiao Honglian, who had a hot temper, could not refute it. The Jiangnan district can destroy them with just a press of a button. Bien Junwoo was very satisfied with the reaction of everyone present. So he coldly continued. As of now, the armed forces of all the local forces in Tianhai city must unconditionally obey my command. Xiao Honglian, Wei Dinghai and Xing Tian were doubtful, but they really did not have the qualifications to challenge the Jiangnan district at the moment. But at this time, Zhang Yi slowly spoke. I am willing to support your actions. But as you said, the reason why the investigation team came here was because the local forces have no way to solve the crisis of zombies and rats. So you have to intervene and command them. But what if we could solve the problem within our sphere of influence ourselves? Zhang Yi had a playful smile on his face. And as soon as he said this, everyone in the conference room looked at him. Zhang Yi, what do you mean by this? Don't tell me that the few people in your shelter can solve such a large number of zombies and rats. Xiao Honglian asked with a sneer, without a trace of belief on her face. Wei Dinghai also leaned back in his chair and said sarcastically, Sure enough, heroes come out of youth. Zhang Yi, you are very capable, but this matter is of great importance. Don't let your momentary selfishness cause everyone to suffer with you. Hearing this, Zhang Yi's smile became even stronger. So with his clasped hands leisurely under his chin, he lazily said, Do you think I am kidding you? No, I am really sorry. In fact, when it comes to the area surrounding my shelter, the zombie and the mutant giant rat problem have been solved. Everyone's face was full of astonishment when they heard this. It was not a child's play, but Zhang Yi said it with a solemn oath and not like a joke. If what Zhang Yi said was true, then doesn't it mean that while the rest were fighting desperately with the zombies and mutated rats, Zhang Yi has been watching the show leisurely? The faces of the leaders of the 4 major forces were uglier than eating shit. I don't believe it. How did you guys do it? Xiao Honglian slams the table, shouting at Zhang Yi through her gritted teeth. She just couldn't come to terms with the fact that Zhang Yi was telling the truth. How she wished to hear from Zhang Yi that he was just joking around. And actually, he suffered heavy losses also. But if Zhang Yi hadn't, then how can he live so freely? Bien Junwoo also looked at Zhang Yi with curiosity. Zhang Yi had a calm smile on his face when he replied, What I said was true. If you don't believe it, you can go and investigate it yourself. Bien Junwoo asked, How did you do it? I'm very curious about this. Everyone stared at Zhang Yi impatiently, and although they were angry, they urgently needed a way to solve the problem of the zombies and rats. It would be great if they could learn from Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi put away his smile and crossed his arms. And in a deep voice, he said lightly, Actually, what happened was quite simple. The zombies feed on humans, so they will gather in places where there are many people. And where are the most people in Tianhai city? It's undoubtedly where you guys gather. Sighing heavily, he turned his head from side to side, taking a good look at everyone and continued. My shelter has the least people, less than 10 in total. In addition, the place is relatively remote and located in the suburbs, so it doesn't attract many zombies. Zhang Yi then frowns slightly as he recalls his encounters. But even so, the battle with them is extremely brutal. After a long period of contact, I found that there is a corpse king commanding them. This corpse king had wisdom and can create new zombies. Therefore, only by killing it can a zombie nest be completely destroyed. But we later found out that the giant rats and zombies had a symbiotic relationship. Once the zombie horde was destroyed, the giant rats will lose their target and will not actively attack humans. So we ventured into the underground tunnel. We used all the weapons we got from West Mountain Base. Zhang Yi lied by omitting important details of the matter, but most of what he said was true. He just deliberately concealed the real method of solving the zombie swarm. The reason for his actions were the questions which would undoubtedly arise if he had told the whole truth. Like, how did you manage to drown the tunnel with seawater? And you seems to be incredibly lucky to find all the necessary materials for your plan at West Mountain Base. All these questions was a direct link to what his power really entails. And in the entire Tianhai city, he was the only one with such an ability. The only one who had a huge alternate space that could draw a large amount of seawater from the East China Sea to flood the subway tunnel. Once he reveals his method, Zhang Yi was afraid that the other organizations, including the envoy from the Jiangnan region, Bian Zhenwu, would put pressure on him and demand more of his help to solve the zombie problem, regardless of whether his plan would work or not. Zhang Yi did not want to sound like an expert in the field of this zombie crisis. After all, he knew that freezing the subway would not completely solve the zombie problem. After listening to Zhang Yi's explanation, everyone felt a bit uneasy. Indeed, Xishan District and Lujiang District are relatively remote, especially the shelter where Zhang Yi lives, which was close to the countryside. And at present, he was also maintaining the status quo of these two districts. Bian Zhenwu stared at Zhang Yi with a strange look, as if seeing his resourcefulness for the first time. Zhang Yi continued, "According to what you said, if our local forces can maintain the stability of their local area, can we give them a certain degree of freedom? Of course, we are very happy to cooperate with the investigation team. If you need our help, just ask. As long as we can do it, we will never hide our secrets. However, at this stage, we still hope to focus more on our own sphere of influence. After all, everyone knows that I have the least number of people, and it is really difficult to allocate personal troops to act in other places." Zhang Yi said this in neither a humble nor arrogant manner. This was to save face for Bian Zhenwu, as if to say, if your Jiangnan district investigation team needs help, we will be glad to assist you. But remember that it wasn't me who asked, but you were the one who came to ask for my help. Bian Zhenwu stared at Zhang Yi for a long time before he replied in a deep voice. "You have done a good job, which also shows that your team has extraordinary wisdom and strength. We will need your strength in our subsequent actions." Hearing this, Zhang Yi just smiled delightfully and said to Bian Zhenwu, "If necessary, please feel free to ask." Again, Zhang Yi did not show any trace of unwillingness and maintained his usual bright smile, offering his full support. After all, he still had to give face to the Jiangnan region. Also, this previous actions would prove his proficiency among the rest and make him some sort of a necessary existence in Tianhai City. Bian Zhenwu nodded when he heard Zhang Yi's answer, so he thanked him in advance. Immediately after, he loudly said to everyone present, "Well, from now on, I need you to cooperate with our actions unconditionally." Bian Zhenwu put his hands on the table and continued in the same tone. "Just share all the information you have in your hands first. In addition, at this time, no matter what kind of grudges you have had before, you must let it go first. Even if you want to fight, you have to wait until the current problem is solved." Zhang Yi, upon hearing what Bian Zhenwu said, had a relaxed smile on his face. Now he was the most leisurely one. His family had not suffered any losses, and he has solved the zombie problem within his sphere of influence. Even if he wants to fight, he is not afraid of anyone. But the other forces did not share the same sentiment. They've been busy with their own problems and didn't have the time to deal with other matters. So as everyone acquiesced to Bian Zhenwu's proposal, Zhang Yixin said with a frown, "Our next step should be about how to solve the crisis of the zombies and the mutant giant rats. You see, in this crisis, the Snow Worship sect had undoubtedly suffered the most severe losses. Several members were either eaten or infected. And if things continue as it is, then it was obvious that the foundation of the Snow Worship sect will be destroyed." But at that moment, there was a sudden loud commotion outside which made everyone subconsciously wonder what the problem could be. At this time, outside the central building, Chen Jingguan, who had been holding back his anger for a long time, points an accusatory finger at Wu Di and said with a gloomy face, "What's so great about you people from Jiangnan district? What's so great about it? I used to be in the Navy. Come and fight me if you have the guts. Or are you afraid you will lose so you want to go cry to your boss first?" Unbeknownst to them, everything said could be heard clearly from the inside. Inside, Wei Dinghai frowned slightly when he heard Chen Jingguan's voice, and although he didn't know what happened that led to the current situation outside, it was obvious that Chen Jingguan and the investigation team had confronted each other, and the atmosphere was a little stiff. What's going on with this kid? He silently thought. Wei Dinghai's face changed, and he subconsciously looked at Bian Junwu, who was sitting not far away. Bian Junwu noticed Wei Dinghai's gaze, turned his head and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just a little conflict among our subordinates." Xing Tian suddenly replied with a smile. He presumed that everyone wanted their subordinates outside to resolve the issue themselves, and didn't require their assistance. After all, a little conflict wasn't a big deal. And indeed his presumptions were correct because Bian Junwu's next words were a direct affirmation of it. Oh, a little conflict? Bian Junwu looked indifferent. Let them deal with their own affairs. We still have very important things to talk about. With those words, it was obvious that he had no intention of finding out what the problem outside was. And it also seems that Bian Junwu was very confident in the strength of his men. Hearing this, everyone had no choice but to return to the discussion at hand. At the same time, outside the central building, Kong Sheng, with an amused smile on his face, had joined Wu Di. Seeing Kong Sheng, Wu Di, with one hand on his waist and the other pointing at Chen Jingguan, said to Kong Sheng, "Look at this. This guy's been angry ever since I said only his boss was allowed inside." Kong Sheng had his arm folded when he replied that what else could useless people such as Chen Jingguan do except being incompetent and furious. Hearing this, Wu Di responded, "But they had already challenged us to a fight. And if we don't accept the challenge, wouldn't it mean that we are afraid of them?" Kong Sheng nodded in agreement. "I don't like being looked down upon by others either. And although I don't have much of anything alone, I can't let the people from these small places really think that the Jiangnan region is like them, without any foundation." The two people continue to talk and laugh, belittling the various forces in Tianhai City. Not to mention Chen Jingguan, the second in command of Morning Dew Base, who had not been taken seriously from the start. "You are too arrogant. We may all be extraordinary people, but it doesn't imply that you are the strongest among us." Chen Jingguan pointed at the two of them with his right hand and scolded. Hearing this, Kong Sheng narrowed his eyes and sneered disdainfully. "Well, it looks like I need to show you the strength of the extraordinary people in the Jiangnan region. Comparing our strength to the strength of the extraordinary people in small places like this, especially you, is a direct insult to our district." Seeing an inevitable direct confrontation between the two, everyone from the various major forces gathered to watch the fight. After all, they were all curious to see just how powerful these people from the Jiangnan region were. Chen Jingguan saw Kong Sheng walk towards him and got into a fighting stance. The reason why Chen Jingguan chose Kong Sheng was because he had judged from his actions that he was a user of the enhancement system. And the enhancement or reinforcement system was the most common and the simplest of the 6 major systems of the superpowers hierarchy. You see, all superpowers of the enhancement system were mutations based on physical abilities, so they were extremely powerful in close combat. But Chen Jingguan was confident in his special system ability, the rubber, and unless the attack exceeds his defense threshold, all physical forms of attack will be ineffective against him. This threshold strength of his, verified during the Battle of the 5 Forces, had exceeded a direct artillery fire, so his confidence was justified. Kong Sheng raised his hands and posed a free fighting posture. At the same time, his body suddenly glowed with a layer of silver-gray light. The skin around him seemed to have turned into steel. Kong Sheng, a reinforcement ability user, had the ability Forged Steel, which could turn his body into steel-like solid, and both defense and attack power had become extremely strong. When Chen Jingguan saw that Kong Sheng's ability was indeed as he thought, a reinforcement system, the corners of his mouth involuntarily raised into a smile. He beckoned Kong Sheng with his finger, meaning Kong Sheng was allowed the first move in their fight. Uncle Yu watched this scene from a distance and couldn't help but say, "The guy from Jiangnan district is going to suffer." The ability of Chen Jingguan was very strange, and it had a restraining effectiveness in close combat. I know this because I had suffered a loss at the hands of Chen Jingguan. If there were no helpers beside me, I might have been strangled to death. I even have lingering worries when it comes to him. Hearing this, Liang Yu took a good look at Kong Sheng's opening move and said, "But the opponent is also a master. You can see it from his breathing and movements. No one knows what the result will be. There was no absolute strength or weakness in the battle between mutants. It all depends on the ability to respond to the enemy on the spot." Back to the fight, Kong Sheng sneered. Even though he knew that the person who attacked first was most likely to reveal flaws, he was still fearless. The next moment, he rushed towards Chen Jingguan like a whirlwind. A swish sound sounded as he did so. Kong Sheng did not rush towards Chen Jingguan from the front, but moved past him, appearing behind Chun Jingguan in a flash. Everyone saw this as a blur. The speed was so fast that they didn't see clearly how he did it. A whip kick hit Chun Jingguan's back fiercely. Kong Shang's speed was too fast, so Chun Jingguan couldn't defend it at all. But Kong Shang was mindful of not hurting his opponent severely. He held back and didn't aim at the back of Chun Jingguan's head. However, when Kong Shang's whip kick hit Chun Jingguan's body, he didn't feel the strong touch. Chun Jingguan's body sank in as if he had no bones. Huh? Kong Shang frowned, and a look of surprise appeared in his eyes. The next second, Chun Jingguan's body twisted and directly wrapped around his right leg. Without giving Kong Shang a chance to withdraw, Chun Jingguan was like a maggot on the tarsal bone, then proceed to directly wrapped around his thigh. After a while, Chun Jingguan tied Kong Shang up tightly. He looked like a huge human snake, and his twisted body wrapped around Kong Shang 5 or 6 times. It was hard to imagine that it was a human body. Seeing this, Kong Shang immediately began to exert his strength to break free from Chun Jingguan's restraints. However, no matter how hard he exerted his strength, the strength he exerted on Chun Jingguan was quickly dissolved. And every time he struggled, Chun Jingguan shrank tighter. Crack, crack, crack. The steel body was tightly bound and crushed, making a sound that made people's teeth ache. Don't struggle. If you keep going like this, I'm afraid I'll accidentally crush your bones. Chun Jingguan's head came close to Kong Shang from behind with a smile. No matter how strong you are, as long as you are entangled by me, you can't escape. You'd better admit defeat. Hearing this, Kong Shang sneered. His right hand was put together, turning into an indestructible sword, cutting towards Chun Jingguan's torso. However, even a hand knife comparable to steel had no effect on Chun Jingguan, who was sticky and slippery. In addition, the cut torn his clothes, revealing his slippery body inside, and that was it. There was no other effect. Seeing this, Chun Jingguan couldn't help himself and started laughing in a mocking manner. I've told you, anyone from the reinforcement department will have no choice but to surrender when they meet me. If you don't behave, I'll break your bones. So what if you're a mutant from the Jangan region? I hope this serves as a lesson to never underestimate anyone, especially me. Kong Shang was tied up tightly, unable to move his hands and feet. Facing such a tough opponent, the onlookers almost all believed that he was powerless to fight back. Uncle Yu, with his arms folded, couldn't help but recall his own personal experience. He shook his head slightly and commented that the outcome has been decided. But at this moment, Kong Shang, who was tied up tightly, suddenly turned his head and opened his mouth towards Chun Jingguan's head. Then, a sharp dagger came out of his mouth and accurately hit Chun Jingguan's left eye with a loud puff. Blood splattered everywhere as Chun Jingguan howled in pain. And due to the severe pain, he could no longer maintain his restraint on Kong Shang. So Kong Shang suddenly increased his strength, and with his sharp dagger still in his mouth, he sliced Chun Jingguan away. Chun Jingguan stood firm on the snowy ground, enduring the severe pain from where his left eye used to be. Seeing this, Kong Shang spat out a piece of the dagger and laughed. The rest reverted to his tongue. At this moment, it was obvious that the dagger that just came out of his mouth was his tongue. I thought your eyeballs could also turn into rubber. Kong Shang licked his lips in full delight as he said this. Uncle Yu couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. He can even strengthen his tongue, turning it into a dagger to pierce Chun Jingguan's eyeball. The change in situation had surprised everyone. Originally, they thought Chun Jingguan was sure to win, but no one expected such a reversal. Sitting on the snowy field, Chun Jingguan looked at Kong Shang with his other eye full of resentment. He covered his injured right eye, gritted his teeth, and asked unwillingly, "How do you know where my weakness was?" Kong Shang just smiled and simply said, "Your body can turn into rubber, but if your eyes could also change, then wouldn't you become blind?" This was understandable. The reason why the eyes can see things is that they can receive light sources and then transmit them to the retina nerves. But once Chun Jingguan's eyes are also deformed, the light will be distorted and naturally become the same as a blind person. Therefore, Kong Shang guessed right that Chun Jingguan's weakness is in his eyes. Go get treatment quickly. If you are late, you will die, Kong Shang said to Chun Jingguan with a big laugh. After all, in such a cold environment, getting injured was not a trivial matter. Kong Shang won the fight cleanly and swiftly without any drag. And after he defeated Chun Jingguan, he crossed his arms and said to everyone around him with some reluctance, "If anyone thinks they have the strength, they can come and fight with me now." Everyone understood that Kong Shang and the others were trying to establish their authority. However, seeing Chun Jingguan's impregnable defense breached so easily, no one from either Morning Dew Base or Radiant Prosperity Base accepted the challenge as complete silence ensues. On the other hand, Chun Jingguan was receiving treatment by his fellow soldier. Seeing that no one had the guts to fight, Kong Sheng shrugged his shoulders in boredom, then turned around and walked back lazily. In the meeting room on the second floor, Bien Junwu, after exchanging intel, placed his hands on the table and began to issue combat instructions. Very good. I have listened to the information provided by each of you. Combined with the information we have, I already know what to do next. Everyone's eyes flickered, and they were quite expectant. The intelligence system possessed by the Jiangnan region must be far beyond their reach. However, they were very curious about how much intelligence the regional headquarters in Jinling had on Tianhai City. Bien Zhanwu's eyes swept over the crowd through his large dark toad-shaped glasses, and he spoke in a serious tone. According to our investigation, the zombies like to attack crowded places. The more people there are, the more zombies are attracted. And the rat swarm and the corpse swarm are in a companion relationship, and they always follow the corpse swarm. So as long as the corpse swarm can be solved, the problem of the rat swarm will not be difficult to solve. And according to the intelligence, the corpse swarm shows a certain regularity in its actions, and it can almost be concluded that there is a corpse king behind it directing it. Of course, corpse king is just a code name. It may be a powerful zombie or it may be a mutant, and the number of corpse swarms is extremely terrifying and can sustain battles in many places in Tianhai City. Bien Junwu raised his voice by several decibels and continued. Then, based on this information, we can basically conclude that it is useless to just eliminate the corpses on the surface. They were puppets after all. Only by eliminating the thing called the Corpse King can we eliminate the corpse-tide turmoil in Tianhai City from the root. So from now on, I ask you the major forces to move most of the population underground. Avoid being in a passively beaten situation all the time. Then concentrate the elite troops in your hands and focus on eliminating the Corpse King. This meant that the major bases should not be greedy for their own little piece of land. The Emerald Waterside base should give up the steel mill, Radiant Prosperity base should give up the oil refinery, and Morning Dew base should give up the port. The leaders of the three forces looked at each other. Although there was some hesitation in their eyes, they finally nodded and agreed after some consideration. In the past, they were unwilling to give up the resources on the surface because they were worried that their future living space would be affected. And even if they gave up the surface resources, they still couldn't solve the corpse tide. But now that people from the Jiangnan district have endorsed them and given them unified command, they have confidence to finally have the ability to put this zombie tide to bed once and for all. It was obvious at this point that when all the major forces sit together and form a united front, many problems would be easily solved. However, at this moment, the high priest of the snow worship sect, who was sitting at the end, spoke up. What should we do? Zhang Yi frowned, obviously unhappy. Zhang Yi points the accusatory finger at Bien Junwu and continued. The other four forces had their own underground shelters and high-level shelters. But our snow worship sect had no such thing. Actually, we have nothing. Zhang Yi then got up from his chair to protest some more. Mr. Bien, you can't be partial in this matter. The lives of my people are at stake. Bien Junwu heard this and turned to look at Zhang Yi. His next words just came out coldly. You have thousands of followers in your sect. They joined your cult. How to protect them is the responsibility of your sect. What did you expect? Did you expect us to help you protect your disciples? Hearing this, Zhang Yi's face turned ugly. He gritted his teeth tightly as he continued to stare at Bien Junwu with a murderous look. And before he could refute, Bien Junwu continued issuing out their plans, ignoring Zhang Yi's murderous gaze without any concern. We can only formulate tactical plans based on your current conditions. If you don't even have this awareness, you can only be destroyed by the zombie tide. It became an undeniable fact that Bien Junwu didn't care about who lives or dies. What he cared about was whether the zombie crisis in Tianhai City could be eliminated. Therefore, possibly putting an end to the zombie virus which would eventually spread to all the surrounding areas. Zhang Yi gasps in shock when he heard this, so he questioned in disbelief. Wait, so in other words, what you are implying is that you intend on watching my people die as a sacrifice? If all the other forces go underground, then wouldn't my snow worship sect undoubtedly become the biggest target of the zombie group? How can our believers survive then? Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows with a hint of amusement on his lips, as if to say, hey, what about your snow god? Is he too lazy to protect you guys or what? Zhang Yi was really enjoying the show. Also, Xiao Honglian, Wei Dinghai and Xing Tian all looked disinterested and unconcerned. They really didn't care about the life and death of the snow worship sect. After all, Zhang Yi's disapproving statement, in their point of view, was absurd to think of. Did he honestly believe that they would risk their lives for his damn cult? Xiao Honglian even sneered and said, you have so many followers in your sect, most of whom are people without combat ability. If you don't have that much power, don't attract so many disciples. If something goes wrong now, you should take the responsibility yourself. Xiao Honglian had long been dissatisfied with the snow worship sect. So naturally, she wouldn't miss this opportunity to bare her claws. Zhang Yi stared at Xiao Honglian with a deep murderous intent in his eyes. At this time, Bian Junwu spoke to break the deadlock. The existence of the snow worship cult also has its significance. If you can't hide your members well, then you can still play another role. Bian Junwu's words gave Zhang Yi a ray of hope. Oh, what are your plans? Bian Junwu just glanced at him coldly. I can't tell you now. It's confidential. But I will tell you the answer in 3 days at most. Now, you all go back and arrange your own people according to my orders. I will inform you of any actions next. Bian Junwu was mysterious. When everyone wanted to ask again, he just waved his hand and asked everyone to leave. No one could do anything. After all, he was a special commissioner of the Jiangnan district. And everyone was afraid of the strength of the Jiangnan district, so they chose to obey the orders. The group stood up and left the meeting room. Zhang Yi was about to leave when he was stopped by Bian Junwu. Zhang Yi, wait a minute. Everyone had different expressions on their faces. They didn't know what Bian Junwu wanted to talk to Zhang Yi about alone. But considering that Zhang Yi was the only one who solved the zombie problem within his sphere of influence, everyone understood why Bian Junwu wanted to find him. Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, Mr. Bian, do you have any advice? Bian Junwu walked to Zhang Yi's side, and for the first time, a smile appeared on his pale and thin face. Can I go to your place and sit for a while? Zhang Yi didn't expect Bian Junwu to make such a request, and he frowned, subconsciously wanting to refuse.